Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for being with us. Red Bull, Monster, Celsius, and Alani Nu. These are some of the most common energy drink brands. Of the hundreds that are on the market right now, many say their products are a convenient way to boost mental alertness and physical performance. You'll find them not just in grocery and convenience stores, but more recently, they're on the menus of major chains like Dunkin', Starbucks, Taco Bell, and Wendy's, all offering their own twists on the popular drinks. In March, Panera Bread introduced a new line of energy refreshers, 2 years after facing lawsuits alleging its now discontinued charged lemonades were linked to fatal cardiac arrests. More recently, Alani Nu was also sued by the family of a 17-year-old girl from Texas who died from cardiomyopathy. The family argues that the brand's marketing is deceptive and lacks sufficient warnings about health risks. So what are the ingredients in energy drinks and how safe are they? And should there be more clear guidelines about intake? Beyond that, do they deliver on their performance claims? Those are the questions we're hoping to find the answers to today. Joining me for the conversation, we have Lindsay Malone, professor in the Department of Nutrition at Case Western Reserve University. Lindsay, thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
We also have Julia Zampano, registered dietitian in the Center for Human Nutrition at the Cleveland Clinic. Julia, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Also with us by video call, we have Murray Carpenter, journalist and author of Caffeinated: How Our Daily Habit Helps, Hurts, and Hooks Us. Murray, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
If you want to be a part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Lindsay, let's start focusing on caffeine. How much caffeine is safe to consume daily?
So with caffeine, generally 400 milligrams is sort of the upper limit before we get into more of an inflammatory range. Of course, everyone has a different caffeine tolerance and metabolism, and so if you haven't had any, you might be more sensitive and your tolerance level might be slightly lower. This is, of course, for adults. We get into kids, generally under 12, caffeine's not recommended at all. And even over 12, right, you could have a lot of sensitivity, assuming, the exposure is already very low and maybe there isn't a tolerance level established there.
Okay, so let's just kind of paint a picture for people here. When we're talking about 400 milligrams of caffeine, can you give us some examples? What does that look like?
Well, it used to be a little more cut and dry. We could say a cup of coffee, right, would be, let's say, 50 milligrams of caffeine. But now a cup of coffee is different depending on where you go, how it's brewed, et cetera. But for the energy drink conversation, right, most of the energy drinks, or I would say many of the energy drinks on the market, fall between like 150 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. If you were brewing coffee at home, this might be like 4 cups of coffee. It's more concentrated though, right? It's like smaller volume, so you can drink it a little faster. Often these are carbonated, so the time in which that caffeine is hitting your bloodstream could be a little bit quicker, maybe combined with some sugar, right? So think about, again, a regular home brewed cup of coffee, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 milligrams.
And for people who aren't coffee drinkers, a 12-ounce can of pop, we call it pop here in Northeast Ohio, that's like 50 milligrams as well, typically.
Right, yes. And again, so it's not as cut and dry anymore. We have like the mini cans. Even the energy drinks I noticed recently have mini cans. So just the caffeine content should be listed, especially for a labeled product coffee. Again, it depends on the grounds and how much water versus grounds you're using.
Okay. Now, Julia, who should avoid caffeine entirely or be especially cautious?
So as Lindsay mentioned, children under the age of 12, and then there's not clear guidelines for older children, teens. So definitely caution there. Anyone with an underlying heart condition should really be very cautious with caffeine. Any of the arrhythmias, if you have atrial fibrillation, even with high blood pressure, you want to caution and be aware of how your body reacts to caffeine.
Why is that? Why is it that people with these particular heart issues, and also pregnant people, right, not supposed to have caffeine?
Yes, you can have a small amount of caffeine when you're pregnant, so you can have small amounts. And even in cardiac issues, you can have very small amounts. The amount is very specific to the person's tolerance and their past medical history and medical condition. So caffeine is a stimulant, so it can stimulate your heart to beat faster. And that can be harmful for someone who might have an underlying cardiac condition. It can lead to arrhythmias, irregular heartbeat, rapid heartbeat, and those risk factors can increase your risk of stroke.
Okay. I want to bring the conversation back quickly to the teenager that we mentioned at the beginning of the show here, the teenager who died in Texas. Her name was Larissa Nicole Rodriguez. And we know that she was a cheerleader and a tennis player. So I mentioned that to say that we believe this was an active individual. And the attorney for her family said over the past year, she drank at least one Alani Nu per day. That's an energy drink made by Celsius Incorporated. And that county medical examiner, where she was from in Texas, determined that the cause of death for that teenager in October 2025 was an enlarged heart due to stress and large amounts of caffeine. So what I do know is that the cans that her attorney said she was drinking had 200 milligrams of caffeine. And what I'm wondering now, and Julia, I'll ask you if you can answer this, if that much caffeine daily over an extended period of time, can that cause cardiomyopathy? Can that cause an enlarged heart? Is that something we've seen before?
Well, I think we don't know enough data to say that can cause it, but we know that there are risk factors there that can increase your risk. So caffeine is an increased risk factor. If you have more stress, more anxiety, that can cause your heart rate to go up, your blood pressure to go up. And some of the other ingredients in some of these energy drinks, like taurine, can increase the stimulating effects of caffeine. So, and then you have other ingredients like sugar and other additives in there that can also increase the effects. So, and then daily intake of someone young with 200 milligrams of caffeine is not something that is advised for a young heart, especially someone who's active. So all of those things at play can increase the risk. Now, we don't know if this girl had an underlying heart condition, so that's something important to note, that these symptoms can be presented, and you definitely want to get help. You want to get your heart checked if you are finding that you're having any cardiac related symptoms related to increased caffeine intake.
Mm-hmm. Murray, you've written about people building up a tolerance to caffeine. Why have you found that caffeine seems to be so normalized in the U.S.? And I do want to ask you how our habits compare around the world.
Well, I mean, most Americans consume caffeine daily. Coffee is still the number one source of caffeine, by volume. That, like, we get more caffeine from coffee than anything else. But interestingly, we consume. I should say that differently. We consume by volume the most caffeinated products are sodas, and then coffee has more caffeine because it's more concentrated, so we get more caffeine that way. But yeah, it's just been a long time tradition, first in coffee and then in soft drinks. There are some countries that consume more. The Scandinavian countries consume more. Some countries consume less. But I'd love to address briefly the idea of caffeine levels in coffee, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
Right. So, I mean, I think the idea that Lindsay mentioned of 50 milligrams in a cup of coffee, I think that's kind of, it was considered a standard for a long time. If you get, say, a 16-ounce cup of Starbucks coffee right now, you get at least 320 milligrams of caffeine. And the reason I say this is because I think a lot of people think energy drinks are really, really laden with caffeine, but a strong 16-ounce cup of coffee has more caffeine than most energy drinks. And so all of this is to say, I think we all need to be aware of how much caffeine we're consuming, in what form, what it does to us when we take it, what it does to us when we don't take it. As you mentioned, some of us develop a tolerance after using it for a while. So, the caffeine that I consume after having been caffeinated daily for 40 years would be different than someone who's caffeine naive. So anyway, a lot of variables, a lot of nuance to the conversation.
Certainly. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation, Mary. A little bit of additional context to add here. We do know that 50% of the customers for energy drinks are adolescents, and we are talking about the amount of caffeine recommended for adolescents, which we touched on. So very important to talk about all of these factors when we're having this conversation here. I want to ask you, Lindsay, Julia mentioned it briefly, but what happens when you mix caffeine with other things. What happens when you mix alcohol with caffeinated drinks?
So, well, there's a lot of things to consider here, right? We have the alcohol, we have the caffeine, and then a lot of times there's sugar mixed in there also. And so we have a number of stimulating, stimulating ingredients there. And depending on the type of alcohol, the amount, the delivery, right? Is it carbonated? Is it liquor, right? You can have a number of things here that are bringing you both up and down at the same time, depending on your state when you're consuming them. And you also have less of an ability to determine when you should be stopping, right? And so you could likely drink much more caffeine because you're enjoying your drink. And, when you have alcohol, essentially your brain is telling you, okay, it's time for the next drink to continue this feeling that I'm having. And that can be very dangerous, mixing in there a loss of inhibitions, good decision making, et cetera. And I'm sure, Julia is familiar with this as well, but that combination is especially bad for your heart and your cardiovascular system. I think that used to be a lot more popular, right, with the Red Bull and vodka and those types of things, but it's still something that we need to watch out for and think about.
If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the consumption of ingredients that are in energy drinks. This includes caffeine in many energy drinks and other things as well. If you want to be a part of this conversation, the number is 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Murray, I want to go back to you and talk a bit more about what we were talking about with serving sizes and the amount of caffeine you can expect to have in a Starbucks drink, for example. So a 16 ounce at Starbucks, that's a grande or a medium. And when you're talking about maybe having more than 300 milligrams of caffeine in that 16 ounce, is there a particular beverage you're talking about? Are you distinguishing between like a black coffee or like a latte or a frappuccino or something?
Yeah, so that's in their nutrition facts for like a pike roast, which is their medium roast, and that's a hot brewed coffee. So yeah, the grande, if you went in and said, yeah, I'd like a grande, that would be roughly 320 milligrams. And one of the interesting things, and I think any coffee drinker knows this, you can go to the same place day after day and get the same order. And because it's a natural product, the caffeine levels can vary widely. So that's sort of a ballpark for how much it is.
Okay. We have an email for you now, Murray, specifically from Peter Vertes, who may be a familiar name to you. Peter says, first shout out to my old university school classmate, Murray Carpenter. Question for him. Peter says, I am a confirmed coffeeholic. What are the cultural factors that contribute to our reliance on caffeinated drinks? Murray?
That's a really that's a great question, and hi, Peter. It's good to hear from you after a long time. Yeah, I mean, coffee has been sort of considered the American drink for a long time, and some people trace this back to the Boston Tea Party. Actually, I'm not an expert on this, but I would say it's certainly very much ingrained in American culture and really ramped up like around the World War II era when people were working in offices, working in factories, and the coffee break was a regular tradition. And interestingly, our coffee consumption peaked around the World War II era, and we're now consuming about almost half as much as our grandparents did.
Well, that's very interesting. Okay, Murray, what does caffeine actually do well? Tell us about some of the benefits that you explain in your book, Caffeinated.
Well, one of the big ones is it improves our mood. And I think most people who are regular caffeine consumers know this. If you're looking forward to your cup of coffee, it can make you feel better. Of course, it can make you feel more energized, and at the appropriate levels, which is like moderate caffeine consumption, it can improve athletic performance. So a lot of athletes would have, in the old days, a little bit of coffee before an athletic event. More recently, an energy drink. And there is some data to show that it will increase both muscular strength and performance. But really, I think that the reason we're reliant on it is because, it makes us feel better and it makes us feel more energetic.
Lindsay, what are some of the other main ingredients in energy drinks, and what do they actually do in our bodies?
So one of the main sort of groups of ingredients would be B vitamins. You see these added a lot to energy drinks, and there's a common misconception that the B vitamins are giving us energy. It's what makes us feel energized. And actually the B vitamins are sort of a catalyst. They're helping you use what you're eating and drinking as energy for your cells. So there's sort of like a conversion element along the way. So if you have B vitamins all by themselves, they're really not going to do very much. You actually need calories from carbs, fats, proteins, or maybe using some of your own body fat for that energy. And so they can be helpful. The interesting thing here is most people are not deficient in B vitamins. So their lack of energy probably has more to do with sleep or hydration or maybe not eating balanced meals. But the power of suggestion is strong, right? So with the placebo effect, sort of understanding or believing that something's going to happen, I think the statistics are somewhere around like 30%-ish of people will start to feel something different. And I think that also has to do with the caffeine, right? So expecting that and that sort of routine. And again, like we just heard, culturally, for adults especially, it's been part of the routine. And I think what we're seeing now, this shift where culturally it's also seems normal to see, a child with a Starbucks drink or a energy drink. They appear, just in the marketing and the branding, they speak to these young people. I think Starbucks just came out with versions of their refreshers that do not have caffeine, which I actually think it was really smart. Julie and I both have young kids, and my daughter's always asking to go to Starbucks for a pink drink, and now you can get it without caffeine, which is great. It makes it a little bit easier to work around that, right? Than trying to explain like what caffeine does to a 10-year-old.
The next generation of mocktails.
Right, right.
Caffeine free, if it is actually caffeine free. And that's something, we can talk about. Julia, when something is labeled decaffeinated, does that mean there's no caffeine in it?
It can have a small amount of caffeine. And again, just like coffee can very much range on how it's brewed and how the caffeine is extracted from decaf coffee, it will still contain a small amount. So for instance, coffee from Starbucks will have a decaf coffee from Starbucks will have more caffeine than a decaf coffee you brew at home. So you do have to be very mindful. I think the big take-home message here is educating yourself on how much caffeine you're consuming in the beverages that you are consuming, and then being very aware of your body's reaction to that caffeine.
I want to talk about some of the other ingredients as well. Julia, I'll stay with you for this, that might be in energy drinks, and if there are long-term effects associated with them, things like taurine, guarana, and things like that.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about those added ingredients and the long-term effects. They're often coupled in these energy drinks. We do know that ginseng can increase can have a stimulant and more of a caffeine-related effect. So when you have that coupled with an energy drink that has caffeine in it, you can have an even greater reaction to it. Some of those symptoms we explained, like an increased heart rate or higher blood pressure. So you want to be cautious with any of those added ingredients. They're not well regulated, and you don't know your body's reaction to them. It's nice to be able to separate and be able to understand how your body reacts to caffeine alone before you couple it with other ingredients.
If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the consumption of ingredients that are in energy drinks, also that are in coffee and other things. Caffeine is what we've been talking about specifically, but also other ingredients along with that, sugar and B vitamins and things along those lines. If you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. We've got an email in from David B. in Cleveland Heights. An email from David reads, I'm looking forward to learning more about the comparisons between different stimulants, including caffeine from a regular cola or Mountain Dew versus energy drinks, coffee, black, or green tea. David says, I remember guzzling pop soda when I was a kid, soda in parentheses from David, without really thinking about the caffeine or sugar dosages. Then I became diabetic. This resonates with me. We had to have a ration on the Coca-Cola in our fridge when we were little. They had to put a limit, like one per day. But how does that compare? Does it matter? I'll ask you this, Lindsay, whether you're getting your caffeine in a can of Coke, in a coffee, in an energy drink. Does the package that it's coming to you in matter?
Yeah, I think a couple things that just come to mind, but one would be carbonation. When you drink something that's carbonated, that pressure causes whatever the liquid is to be absorbed a little bit faster, right? It's just putting that pressure on. And so whatever's in it, whether it's sugar or caffeine, we're going to see in the bloodstream a little bit quicker. So I think that would make a difference. There might be other factors there that I'm less familiar with, but I think carbonation would probably be the first one that I would think of.
One thing I'd like to add is he mentioned green tea. Green tea has an ingredient called L-theanine, and L-theanine can help offset some of those negative symptoms of caffeine. It can help more calm the body. It can reduce the jitteriness, the increased flush of caffeine in the system. So I do feel that some people who don't tolerate caffeine well, or coffee, sorry, not caffeine, but coffee, can tolerate caffeine in the form of green tea a little easier. So I do think, again, back to my first point, is just being very self-aware of how your body reacts to certain beverages that contain caffeine.
Marie, this is something that you dig into, is different sources of caffeine in your book. So what did you find when it comes to natural versus synthetic caffeine? Does that make a difference in the effect on the body?
Interestingly, it doesn't. I mean, synthetic caffeine is far less appealing. It's synthesized in pharmaceutical plants, primarily in China, and this is what's mixed into our soft drinks and energy drinks. And, as opposed to, I mean, some actually label them as extracting caffeine from green tea, but mostly it's synthetic. But honestly, it's the amount of caffeine you're getting that makes a difference. And that's the important thing. However, and this is a big caveat, and it's important that it relates to what the caller said. Caffeine can drive the consumption of products. Like, it can make you more inclined to reach for a product. Coca-Cola, for example. It's always been caffeinated, and it's one of the things that reinforces that behavior. If you're consuming Coca-Cola, you're getting an awful lot of sugar, and that sugar has remarkably bad health effects on you, liquid sugars. So I would say the caffeine itself in isolation, it really doesn't matter what source you're getting it from, but really do pay attention to the other things that are coming with the caffeine, especially if it's sugar or artificial sweeteners, if you're sensitive to those.
I know we're talking about beverages today almost exclusively, but what about other things? Does caffeine come in other things? I remember hearing an idea that if you ate an apple, it would give you the same amount of energy as a cup of coffee, and we'll say that's the 50 milligram caffeine cup of coffee, just for discussion today. Lindsay, is that true? Does an apple give you any energy at all?
So it has calories, which as a dietitian, we say calories are energy, but it doesn't have any caffeine in it, at least that I'm aware of. The only food that I'm really aware of would be chocolate that has
Dark chocolate.
caffeine. Yeah, dark chocolate. And if you're having, something with cacao powder in it or cocoa powder, it would be more concentrated. If you have like a chocolate bar, you have some, usually some milk and some sugar, like diluting the actual cocoa beans. But if you're using that powder in anything, a drink, a baked good, whatever, you would definitely get some caffeine.
Hot chocolate?
Hot chocolate, yeah.
Okay. Julia, we have seen cases of strokes and heart complications tied to energy drinks. We talked about the worst case scenario, someone dying potentially related to consumption. That's the lawsuit that's being carried out right now anyway. So what is happening in the body? What should people watch out for if they are consuming caffeine and maybe they are getting to a place where they should seek medical care? How do you know that?
Great question. So anytime you question it, you should seek medical care. Like, if you're really questioning it, there's no harm in calling 911 and having appropriate help to see and assess you, or going to the urgent care, whatever you feel most comfortable with. But we're looking at rapid or irregular heartbeats. So your heart feels like it's racing. It maybe even feel like it's pounding or it's coming out of your chest. It could feel like something's very heavy on your chest. You want to look out for that. If you have any tingling or loss of sensation in one side, if you have slurred speech, you have issues with your vision. So any of those signs and symptoms, you really want to seek medical attention. If you feel very weak or faint, So coupled with all these symptoms, if you have the ability to check your heart rate or your pulse and or your blood pressure, and those are very elevated, those are other signs that you really want to seek medical attention.
Okay. Murray, in cases involving serious health outcomes, especially among young people, where do you think the responsibility falls here? Is there a case for stronger oversight from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration? You know, we don't necessarily see on a can of pop have 1 can of pop per day, so to speak.
100%. Yeah, I think we need much stronger labeling. I think it would be great, for example, to see the number of milligrams of caffeine on large numbers on the front of a can or a bottle. I think that would go a long way towards improving our caffeine literacy. I picked up a can of Celsius the other day, which is incredibly popular now. It has 200 milligrams of caffeine, a good amount, but it's the number is tiny on the back. You really have to look for it. So yeah, in terms of regulation, I think improved labeling would go a long, long way to improving our awareness of caffeine and how best to use it.
If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the very popular item that is energy drinks and also other beverages that include caffeine and other ingredients that are also present in energy drinks. If you want to be part of this conversation, the number is 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. We have an email in from Nancy. Nancy says, just so I understand, if I don't seem to experience any negative physical effects from caffeine, is it okay for me to drink it? Lindsay, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think caffeine is safe for most adults, right? So unless you have an underlying health condition, as Julia mentioned, for many people, it's fine to consume. It's really about the amount. And then also, again, paying attention to how you feel. So one thing I hear a lot is, I get to have coffee and just go right to sleep. And that doesn't mean that you're getting good sleep. It just means you can fall asleep, right? So sleep is, really underestimated as one of these things that our bodies need, adults and kids. It's our repair time. And so you want to not only think about, can I fall asleep, but am I able to get good restful sleep, meaning I'm waking up in the morning refreshed, like ready for my day, and play around with a caffeine curfew. Like maybe it's noon, maybe it's 1 o'clock, maybe you can even go to 3 o'clock, but everyone's going to be a little different. And I think when we're thinking about our overall health, not just this sort of upregulation of the nervous system, but also, can I then rest when I need to rest?
Going back to that question about being able to drink coffee and then take a nap, what does that have to do with? Is that just brain chemistry? Is that tolerance related?
I think it's a number of things. I think it's your metabolism of caffeine. I think it's tolerance, and everyone's a little bit different. So there are certainly people who can drink a caffeinated beverage and be able to sleep, and many people who are then unable to sleep for the whole night. So I think it is more individual. I would assume that you are not one of those people who can drink it and go to bed unless you've had that experience. I think most people have a hard time falling asleep with caffeine in their system.
Okay. Lindsay, I want to stay with you for just a moment, and I want to ask about some of the risks of other ingredients that are in these drinks, like added sugar and artificial sweeteners. And, we just talked about decaffeinated and what that means, but sugar-free and what that means, and if that is actually a healthier alternative.
Yeah, so sugar, by itself, right, is something that isn't driving any good health outcomes. So avoiding added sugars when possible, is a good idea. And then the artificial sweeteners, right, like your aspartame, your sucralose, sort of the classic pink, yellow, blue packets that we all think of, those tend to be not great for you. They can interfere with your gut microbiome, which is helping you produce hormones and neurotransmitters and absorb the nutrients from your food. So I generally like to avoid those or look for products without them. And then we also have monk fruit and stevia, which are a little bit newer to food products, which tend to be really well tolerated. They don't offer any calories, and they tend to not have the same impact as those artificial sweeteners on the gut microbiome. Even better would be trying something that's unsweetened and trying to get away from such a need for sweetness. Many of these artificial sweeteners, even so we have like the artificial and then the more plant-based options are, like 200 to 600 times sweeter than sugar. So think about, the fact that you're training your taste buds. So when you have a strawberry or an apple, it's not going to taste sweet anymore. You're expecting something that is really, much, much sweeter than that. So trying to get away from that, one of the things that I've seen that could be useful if you're wanting a little caffeine, if you're not a coffee or a tea drinker, there are carbonated waters with caffeine that, you can skip all the B vitamins. Like if the caffeine's what you want and it can be useful for performance, maybe that's an option for you.
Okay, I need you to settle a debate with me right
Yeah.
now. Carbonated water like LaCroix.
Yeah.
Is that hydrating?
Yes. Yeah, I would say for the most part.
All right, Nicole, you
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. So the carbonated waters, I think, are great because they do just give you a little bit of something different, right? And you do have to be cautious with the caffeine, as we have discussed, basically this whole show. And it's not always obvious how much and in which of the carbonated waters have the caffeine. So more recently, I've seen them in the store, sort of next to the energy drinks. So I think that's a good trend to try and keep all of those things together so you know what you're buying.
All right, let's talk. Please, Julia, go ahead.
I love the option of teas too, because teas tend to have less caffeine, especially just like a tea bag, the old school tea bag. A black tea or green tea have a lot of health benefits too. So they're lower in caffeine, and there's a lot of good studies that support, they're rich in antioxidants and support overall health.
Okay. Let's talk about the difference between energy drinks and sports drinks right now. Those are often confused. Julia, tell us about the difference and what athletes might want to lean toward.
So, when you're looking at the difference, sports drinks usually have electrolytes. And then energy drinks are where you may have where you will have the caffeine and then some of those other additives like the taurine or ginseng or the B vitamins. Sports drinks may or may not contain B vitamins. Most likely they don't. They're usually just electrolyte based. So the difference here comes on whether you're trying to utilize a little bit of caffeine for enhancing performance or if you're just trying to better hydrate yourself after activity. So if you're targeting younger adolescents, you really want to stick to just the sports drinks and avoid energy drinks. If you're more of an adult or a high school athlete and you do want to use small amounts of caffeine, you just, back to all of the things we've addressed here, just be very aware of how much caffeine is in there. And you really, from an increasing exercise performance standpoint, you don't need a lot of caffeine. It's very little. It's way more. These energy drinks have way more than you actually need to increase performance.
Well, so can you elaborate on that a little bit, Julia? How much caffeine would the average person actually see a performance enhancement from consuming?
So, Murray may know the better answer to this, but I would say 50 milligrams would be an appropriate amount to get enhanced performance, between 50 and 100 at the most.
Okay.
Lindsay, do you have an
Yeah, and I think we see this in drinks, but also chews. If you're a runner, there are like the chews and the gels, and some of them have caffeine. It depends, I know we hate that answer, but it's true. Each product has their own formulation. And the key, especially with sports, is practicing ahead of time what you want to do in your competition, your day of. Often you need to have it 20 to 30 minutes before your actual, whatever the event is. And again, when we talk about teen athletes, this is a sticky area because you can have an underlying heart condition where it might not be it might not have come to light yet, and we just want to be very cautious about that. But I do, you don't want to vilify caffeine. I think it can be really useful, especially in the realm of sports. And again, I think the timing, and this goes with sports nutrition in general, it's like timing and practicing what you're going to do the day of before the actual competition.
Murray, do you have any thoughts on that? It does seem, anecdotally speaking, that we do see athletes promoting energy drinks a bit more now, or maybe it's just more prevalent because of access to social media. But what do you think about that? Do you think that we are seeing something that is actually indicative of the performance boost that people will get if they consume that small amount of caffeine?
Okay, well, it's a modest exercise boost that you can get from caffeine, it is actually you can, if you can tolerate as much as 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilo of body weight. So for a adult, this could be 150, 200 milligrams, fair amount. That will give you some athletic performance improvement. However, and there's a big caveat here, is if it's going to increase your anxiety on race day or whatever it is, you don't want to do it. And the performance improvements again are going to be modest. And so I would just get back to this point that I think both Lindsay and Julia have made in various ways, that you really want to be aware of what caffeine does in your body when you take it and how much you're taking it, and just a lot of caffeine awareness. So this, if you're an athlete, you would want to try a small amount, see if you tolerate it well, see if it helps you, and go from there. And I also want to underscore that I don't want to be construed as giving medical advice here. If you have concerns about your heart or anything else, those are best discussed with your doctor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the consumption of energy drinks, and particularly about caffeine and the amount of levels of caffeine that you will see some sort of result from, whether that be a positive or whether that be potentially a negative. If you would like to be part of this conversation, the number is 866-578-0903. You can email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. We have an email in now from Anthony, and Anthony says, I had a genetic test and it showed that I have a caffeine sensitivity and I should be careful to limit caffeine. Thanks for sharing that with us, Anthony. I wasn't aware that something like that would show up on a genetic test. And I want to turn the conversation back to something that we talked about a bit earlier. Lindsay, I had asked you about using an apple, for example, as an energy source, and you said, well, it has calories in it, so yes. But you have written about food-based energy sources that would be alternatives, like beets, for example. So what's happening there, and how does that work into an overall diet?
So beets increase something in your bloodstream called nitrous oxide, or NO for short, and it helps with increasing blood and oxygen delivery to your muscles when you're active. And so there's some good athlete studies on this. You could certainly get this from whole beets. I think if I put some whole beets in front of any of my kids right now, they would not eat them. But you can get beet powder as well, which mixes nicely into water and can be conveniently used for sports or activity. You could also get the same thing from leafy greens. And so, of course, the whole foods can be beneficial. Sometimes when we get into sports, most people are not wanting to go into their activity or event with a full stomach. And so the powders can be a nice, convenient way to do that. Generally, with any sort of powder, I usually recommend looking for the designation NSF certified for sport. And that means it's been tested for purity, quality, potency, and can be really useful. And these just aren't for our, competitive athletes. It could be an everyday athlete. It could be you, training for a 5K, just looking for a natural way to have good energy on your run.
Mm. As we wrap things up here, we've got about a minute and a half, so I'll ask each of you quickly. I'll start with you, Julia. In your study and your practice, how do you handle caffeine? Is it something you steer away from? Do you look for alternatives? Are you still enjoying it?
I personally do get a little bit of side effect from caffeine. So I tend to do more green tea for caffeine. And I'm very aware of how much is in, I do a matcha. So I'm very aware of how much I'm putting in, and I can dose it appropriately based on what I'm doing or how I'm feeling that day. And then in my personal practice, in my clinical care, I do speak to my patients and really understand how they feel when they have caffeine and help guide them appropriately based on their medical history and their symptoms associated.
How about for you, Lindsay?
Yes, I am a coffee lover. I really love coffee in my personal life, in my teaching world. I'm educating about the types of coffee and, more importantly, like what goes in your coffee, right? How to enjoy it responsibly and to know yourself. For students, the students that I work with, I see a lot of energy drinks around campus, and I'm constantly talking about, the impact of caffeine and just knowing yourself and what that does to you.
Mm-hmm. And Murray, how about for you?
Yeah, I'm a coffee drinker, maybe 16 to 20 ounces a day, so pretty good dose. And I do have a caffeine curfew. That's a new term that I just picked up today. which is I cut it off at 1 o'clock, and then I find it doesn't, I don't notice that it interferes with my sleep.
All right. Well, there you go. Well, I want to thank our panel for being with us today. Joining us on video, Murray Carpenter, journalist and author of Caffeinated. Thanks, Murray.
Thank you.
Here in studio, Julia Zampano, registered dietitian at the Center for Human Nutrition with the Cleveland Clinic. Julia, thanks.
Thank you so much.
And Lindsay Malone, instructor in the Department of Nutrition at the School of Medicine for Case Western Reserve University. Lindsay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll hear a conversation with Weekend Edition host Scott Simon about his new book centered around a peculiar character, Ulysses S. Cat. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for staying with us. Since the beginning of time, animals have been intertwined in humans' lives in one way or another. Pets today provide comfort, laughter, and companionship, and of course, heartbreak when they cross the Rainbow Bridge. The importance of pets and the lessons they can provide are explored in a new book out today, Ulysses S. Cat and Other Animals I Have Known. This is by NPR's Weekend Edition Saturday host, Scott Simon. This book is a collection of essays, many about Simon's current pets, a French poodle named Daisy, whom he uses a French accent to describe, and a cat named Gato Blanco. I have a feeling that might be a white cat. Simon also shares stories about animals he's met while reporting across the world for NPR. IdeaStream Public Media's Anna Huntsman recently talked with Simon about the book and the animals featured in it, including a rather unusual pet whose name you might recognize. We can't take your calls right now, but please feel free to send us your thoughts. You can email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Here's that conversation.
Scott, thank you so much for taking the time. I have to tell you that I have two cats, two black cats, Harry and Marv, and they are currently shut out of the room because, as you, I'm sure know, they can knock things over and be a distraction. So,
Oh, that's been my experience here as I speak to you from my home office where Gato Blanco has. But it's interesting. Half a dozen times Gato Blanco has interrupted, by just knocking something off my broadcast desk here. Every time I have told a great writer, a Hollywood star, a public figure, oh, I'm sorry about that sound, but our cat just swished that off with his tail. I've never heard them be anything less than gracious. Everybody, this is one of the experiences that you have with animals. It cuts across all kinds of divisions. They'll immediately say, oh, is he all right? Is everything all right? Can I say hello? I think that's one of the things that brings us closer as human beings, is that relationship with animals.
I've had a similar experience as well when I do interviews. If the cat jumps on my lap or something, they're usually like, oh, who is that? Who's this? And I always make some sort of joke like, oh yeah, Marv has a question as well,
Well, I make that joke, but it's not a joke. When Daisy jumps on my lap, she has a question. She's a French poodle, and she thinks we really ought to have more news about France on our show. But I digress.
Well, I was even debating if I was going to ask you this, but since it came up, I would love to hear the accent that you use when you talk about Daisy or that you give her.
Well, I should explain. I am our animal's interpreter. I consider this a very important role that I have in our family life. So, for example, when my wife and I are walking Daisy in the morning, and she loves people, and she's going just a little bit mad at saying hello to people, I know, I can infer, and I will repeat what she's saying, which is, oh, I am cute, huh? You cannot resist me, huh? Give me a little pet, huh? A few years ago, our daughters and my wife were in California. They were at a barn. They met an animal, I believe it was a horse psychic. And Daisy was with them, and they put Daisy into her arms, and they said to the animal psychic, could you ask Daisy one question? What does she think about the voice that our father gives her? And the pet psychic was very shrewd. She held Daisy close, and Daisy looked very relaxed, and she said, Daisy says that's not at all what she really sounds like, but your father seems to enjoy it, so it's okay with her. What a brilliant answer.
That's awesome. I mean, you talk about all these fun, lighthearted experiences you've had with your pets and just animals you've met over the years. And was it just one day you thought, man, I really need to just put this all in a book? Was this something that you thought about for years, or what inspired you?
Well, I did an essay about the ways in which animals both enliven and sometimes make us feel overwhelmed in our lives, and it caught the attention of a publisher who suggested it to me. And it's not just, I'm afraid, lighthearted stories, but that's part of the experience of animals being running mates in our lives. I mean, inevitably there's loss. First pet, my childhood pet, Penny, who was a washed-out Chicago police dog, German Shepherd, actually discovered a couple of bodies, including the one when my grandmother took her life. I write about the siege of Sarajevo, when so many people went through extraordinary measures to share their meager humanitarian supplies with their pets, their dogs, their cats, their birds, and would risk their lives to walk their dogs in the middle of sniper fire, because as they explained, there's no way to explain to a dog, well, sorry, we'll have to wait until the sniper fire lets up. But it was an aspect of their humanity. It was keeping the human enterprise of their family alive and going, and keeping their hearts going during absolutely the worst of circumstances. And this is a relationship that we people have had with our animals for centuries. And I became drawn into the idea that this is something worth marking because it has enriched the human experience.
As you mentioned, there are some fun stories, some that really tug at your heartstrings, and there's some that have a lesson attached, whether it is about grief or love, or was there a particular lesson or story that you were especially looking forward to sharing when you were writing?
I had to recontemplate our relationship with the title character, Ulysses S. Cat, who was the last cat of my mother and my late stepfather. And Ulysses S. Cat did not like our family, me, my wife Caroline, or our daughters in particular, because when we would come to visit my mother would speak to us, our family, particularly our daughters, in the same, little voice like this that she larded on to Ulysses. And Ulysses, of course, would feel, they're rivals. It's the last thing I need. But I came to appreciate all over again that Ulysses came into their lives at a time when my stepfather was ailing. He was mostly bedridden or occasionally in a wheelchair. He was feeling left out in life. He was feeling vulnerable and that he wasn't contributing much. All Ulysses wanted from him was a warm place to curl up. All Ulysses wanted from him was a pat and someone to hold him. And Ulysses was absolutely vital in what turned out to be my stepfather's last days, because Ulysses reminded him that he was capable of giving joy and pleasure and companionship to someone in this world. And I think that contribution was irreplaceable. And it's one of the many things that animals can do in our lives.
Yeah, there are so many things that you talk about in this book about the value of having pets and how sometimes the lessons change over time, as you just mentioned with Ulysses. IdeaStream gets a shout out in the book, and I was wondering if you can explain where we appear and how we're doing, I should ask.
There is a shout out because we have a worm bin on our balcony. Actually, we call them the Slimans, and each and every worm is named after a local public radio station, including the IdeaStream. So it is not unusual for us to lift the top of the worm bin, and I will say, hello, WBUR, hello, KQED, hey, IdeaStream, Cleveland rocks, Cleveland rocks. And I will tell this just to your listeners. I can see IdeaStream begin to, bounce along a little bit to Cleveland rocks, Cleveland rocks.
Well, of course we have to. That's our song. It plays at the end of Guardians games. So of course, I'm glad that our worm is doing its job.
IdeaStream is a fine worm, and often reminds me that even though as human beings we sometimes look down physically and in other ways on worms, IdeaStream will ask me, yeah, and what are you doing for the environment? Usually gets me there.
Very inquisitive. What do you hope overall? What's the main goal you have that readers take away from this book?
That they be reminded of the fact that animals are our running mates through life. I don't want to compare it to the human experience, but they are part of the human experience. We have shared our lives together on this planet for centuries at this particular point. And the animals we have in our lives are often ways of marking milestones in our lives. Certainly they have been that way. I look back at my own childhood and then adulthood and, of course, the childhood that our daughters have had. And I think animals bring us out of ourselves. They make us understand some of the most fundamental principles of life, which is closeness and empathy and companionship. And they don't, as a rule, ask much of us except just to be close, except just to be part of our lives. And I think doing this book and thinking through some of these ideas, as I said, sometimes in some very sad and discouraging circumstances, reminded me all over again, animals decorate our lives, animals enrich our lives, animals make us understand the gift of life that we have.
I really enjoyed reading it, and I bet you're excited to share it with the world. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Anna.
That was IdeaStream Public Media's Anna Huntsman with longtime NPR host Scott Simon about his new book, Ulysses S. Cat and Other Animals I Have Known, out today. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU, and you can find every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. To get the last word on today's topics, email us at soi@ideastream.org and find us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Yesterday, we talked to the team behind the documentary Stripped for Parts, American Journalism on the Brink, about why local journalism is on the decline. Lucy in Seven Hills wrote, I wrote for a nice little local citizen journal, the Parma Observer, for nearly 16 years. The publisher, Dan McCarthy, who died last July, never took sides and always respected contributors' voices. Dan didn't edit even the most damping facts and opinions. The Parma Observer is no longer published. It's a voice sorely missing, as is Dan. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lucy. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we'll bring you the results from today's primary elections across Ohio and talk about implications. Thanks for being with us here on The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll see you back here tomorrow.